Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Hashagen. Welcome to our live special report, The New Normal. It's been months since businesses were shut down and offices were closed. But as things start to reopen and people head back to work, what is expected of employees and their employers? And what should still be off limits? So this morning we're getting some expert advice. And Avrohom Gefen is a partner at Vishnick, McGovern, and Milizio's litigation practice group, and they specialize in commercial and employment litigation. Do remember, we want to hear from you. For the next half hour, we'll be answering your questions live. You can submit them right now on our social media pages. All right, so navigating your return to work, to your office, it can be tricky. And what can your employer really expect from you, and what can you expect from your employer? We're going to get some of those answers right now. So thank you so much for joining us. I guess I want to start with what, for businesses that are now reopening, what are the things that they need to be considering?
Good morning, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here. Some of the things that businesses need to consider and need to have, some of it's optional and some of it's recommended, some of it's actually required, is a plan. One of the most important things is to have a plan to go back to the office, how they're going to operate once they reopen. The state has a template that any business can use, but you're not required to use that template. And although it's not required to be filed with the state, every business must have it on file, and the state is allowed to ask the business for a copy of it in order to make sure that they have a plan in place. The plan can be things as important as, which seem kind of intuitive, socially distancing, having a capacity that's only 50% of the maximum allowed capacity for that particular location, not congregating in public places. And then there are things that are more of suggestions or recommendations, such as staggering work hours, perhaps having a schedule where 50% of employees come in on certain days of the week. Obviously, this is not possible or practical for some businesses, but it is recommended.
Now, I know one question we seem to get nearly every week on the show is from people saying, what if I'm not comfortable going back to work? So what happens then?
Well, the answer is that an employer can generally require employees to come back to work if they just simply have a fear of coming to work. However, there are exceptions to that. For example, if there is an employee that has a particular susceptibility or reason why they cannot come to work, then a business has to at least think about or consider giving that person a reasonable accommodation, which may include allowing them to continue to work at home.
Okay. Now, if a worker does have an existing health condition or, something like a compromised immune system, do the employers now have to make certain changes? Are there regulations in place to, protect the workers?
It's really a case-by-case basis. The fact that a person, for example, is older, which is one of the conditions that
Sure.
can cause a higher rate of susceptibility to the disease. And obviously, if an older person actually gets the disease, they're more at risk for serious complications than a younger person. But there's no bright line or blanket rule that says that I have to give an accommodation to an employee just because they say, I don't feel comfortable and I feel susceptible. Every case has to be evaluated. There has to be a dialogue between the employer and the employee to find out whether or not an accommodation is necessary and whether an accommodation is actually required under the law. And there are federal laws as well as state laws as well as local laws that guide employers in these types of situations.
So OSHA obviously requires that employers provide a work environment that's free from recognized hazards that are, likely to cause any physical harm. But how do places of business navigate that now?
Well, I think a lot of businesses are first becoming familiar with OSHA now. Businesses that never had to consider it or never really thought about it. Usually it's the construction type businesses that think about OSHA, not a office environment. But you're correct that OSHA now is requiring or always required a safe business environment, which was never really an issue for most offices, but now it is. And the thing about the OSHA requirements is that if you follow the guidelines laid out by the state, then you will be in compliance with the OSHA guidelines. So it's important for businesses to develop a plan, and the plan should include these safety and precautionary methods such as social distancing, not gathering, staggering work hours, not congregating.
Now, what if an employee feels like their boss isn't doing the right thing to protect them? What can they do?
Both New York and New Jersey, and I'm getting this question from employers as well as employees who are clients of mine who want to know what are my rights and what are my obligations. Both employers and employees have to use a common sense approach to this. And if an employee is complaining about something or doesn't feel safe about something, the employer, even if they think that they're following the guidelines, should take that into consideration and should consider making an accommodation even in the office to address that specific complaint that an employee may have. There are ways that an employee can file complaints. Both the New York State and New Jersey have links on their website to file complaints by employees against employers if they feel like they're not complying with the law and creating an unsafe environment.
Now, does an employer have to tell the people who work there, what area, if somebody were to test positive? Because I remember, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, we saw this come up with Amazon, where the workers were saying they wanted to know what shift the person worked who tested positive and who may have come in contact. But that kind of puts them in like a sticky situation because you don't want to also hurt the person who tested positive and maybe have them be ostracized in the future.
Sure. And there are privacy considerations that employers have to take into account when they're doing this. They have to do it in a way that, as much as possible, allows the employee who tested positive to remain anonymous. In other words, they would say an employee who worked in this area during these hours tested positive rather than this person tested positive. And that's one way that employees can both try to protect the privacy of the employee who tested positive, as well as keeping the other employees in the loop, allowing them the information necessary that they can take any precautions they have to take so that everybody is protected.
So are there legal guidelines for this? Should it be, how does an employer handle that? Is there actually like a letter of the law to follow on this?
It's not exactly clear, but again, what the legal recommendations are to, as much as possible, keep the name of the person anonymous while still disseminating the information to the other employees who may have come into contact with that person.
Okay, now let's talk about childcare. I know this is one of the things that also comes up quite a lot. Right now, a bunch of camps decided not to open. A lot of places, they're questioning whether they're going to be able to open their daycare safely. So a lot of people are starting to get called back to work, but might have childcare issues. Are there special circumstances for employees because of that?
Well, there are, and a lot of it has to do with the employers using their common sense to what the future is going to hold. If they want to hold on to good employees, people that have been productive and people that they think are going to be productive in the future, they need to take all this into account. One of the biggest impediments to the full reopening of the economy is going to be schools and childcare. If schools and childcare can't open, then you have a large percentage, a large portion of employees who are parents or caregivers who cannot return to work, at least in office or in store or in business, because of the lack of childcare. So there is consideration that employers must give to employees when they're unable to obtain childcare when schools remain closed.
Now, are they covered under any of the pre-existing federal laws?
No, there are no laws that say that if I can't come to work because of childcare issues, then I am somehow protected or allowed to have an accommodation, although it is recommended.
Okay. Now, can my employer require me to wear a face mask?
Yes, employers can require, and in fact, employers are required to provide face masks to their employees when they come to work. And any sort of precautions that an employer chooses to do, as long as they're in the realm of reasonable, they're legally allowed to do that.
And what about PPE? If they want their workers to wear PPE, are they allowed to say you have to wear this in order to continue working here?
Yes, and of course it's going to depend on the situation. If someone is sitting in an office alone by themselves, there would be no reason to require an employee to sit wearing a face mask or a gown. But if employees have to, for the nature of their job is they have to interact with one another, then you can require the employees to wear PPE.
Okay, and Sam wants to know, can a business mandate employees return to work or be terminated?
Yes, except for the circumstances that we discussed where an employee, for example, has a specific condition that would require the employer to give them a reasonable accommodation, then they certainly can require the employees to return to work. And this is a common question that I've been asked by my clients, especially in light of the fact that, as you know, there has been, and although it's ending soon, under the unemployment, there's the extra $600
Sure.
that they're receiving, and many employees are saying, "I'd rather stay home and collect the unemployment.
Right.
I'm making as much or maybe even more
Sure.
than I was making previously, so I'm not going to go back to work."
Okay, we're going to continue our conversation straight ahead and get to more of your questions. You can post them right now on our social media pages. Thanks for joining us here at News 12. We're going to jump right back into your questions as we discuss employment on both sides of it for employees and employers, what they need to know. So Shane is asking, what about rent relief for business owners? My landlord wants past rent since I was closed in March. If I haven't been able to operate, how am I supposed to pay 4 to 5 months rent?
Well, Elizabeth, that's a really great question. And simply the answer is there has not yet been any business rent relief passed. It's been talked about, but as of yet, there is nothing. There is a portion of the PPP loans that businesses were allowed to apply for, and many did, that can be used, up to 40% of that can be used for things such as rent. So that should be helpful to some businesses. But if the loan either was not large enough, or if the loan had to be used mostly for employees to pay their payroll, then these businesses are really going to be having a tough time.
Yeah, Tony Marie is asking pretty much the same thing. She says, will there be a business rent relief? Now, in your experience, you know, what should people be doing if they don't have the money to pay the rent and try to reopen their business right now?
Most important thing is to speak to the landlord. It shouldn't be an adversarial type of communication. They should try to meet with the landlord, speak to them. Landlords want to keep businesses in their areas, in their spaces. If they are not there anymore, they have to find a new renter. They have to then worry about the economic viability of the new company coming in. The economy is not in a great situation where there are many companies that are going to be doing it. So,
all right. Thank you so much for all of your clarity on this.